I will repeat this. I would like to thank you, Steve, for chairing our working group, and Dan for being the motivation and inspiration of all this work, and of course all colleagues on the working group, because it was extremely interesting and supportive and enlightening to have their comments and their interventions on the work carried out. But just to start off, competition was repeated by Dan many times in his presentation. Competition is important, as we all understand, in actually reducing the cost of risk. If we look at competition and how we measure it, we actually measure it through the number of bids received per call. We know that various item factors influence the number of bids. These are the tendering process, the institutional maturity, contractors that exist in the country or in the wider market, the trend of the market we're supplying, the project size, which is questionable in this particular study. And of course, there are many who talk about national strategies and policies, usually referring to favoritism or some sort of protectionism. But these are elusive ideas, and we'll come back to what they mean for our case. Of course, there are thousands of other items that influence competition, which cannot be captured, and information up to date is not conclusive. No one can say, I know exactly how to set up competition. So what we did, we picked up the contract award notices when a call is out, larger than a certain level in the European Union. Public authorities, contracting authorities at the very end have to put out information sheet saying, amongst various things, what sort of procedures they followed, how many bidders there were for the call, who were the awardees. These are information that we picked up. We picked up records from 2006 to 2016. These are a huge number of records, almost 5 million. We can only differentiate them based on the product code or service code, so we selected respective or relevant codes, and this reduced the number to 1.5. Trying to find usable ones, over 10 million for transport, they were further reduced to something over 6,000. And then we considered focusing on rail and road, which were the most important factors. These made just something under 4,200 records. This data set also includes some PPPs, but we don't know which ones. It's very difficult to identify the few PPPs in this, in general, traditional procurement. So we added information from the European Investment Bank on PPPs, and we added qualitative and more detailed information on the few projects, 55 the number of projects we have on PPPs, and traditional would make them 100 from the benefit project. Furthermore, concerning actors, we collected information from the public works financing, and then we also needed to know who the actors' groups are, because they're families of companies together. We collected this information basically from the internet, so it was collecting and saying who's who and who belongs where. Just to give you an idea of how the trends are, now blue is road, green lines are rail, and the most interesting thing to see in this graph is that after 2010, the calls for rail are more than those for road. So after 2010, green overrides blue. And it's also interesting to see that there's something funny happening in 2010, which there could be various reasons, but who knows. In practice, there's a transition in the second period between 2011 and 2016 between these two markets. And obviously, for any sort of research reasons, 2010 was not included because it's strange. It's a strange year. What we found. If you look at the processes between 2006 2009, we'll see that there's plenty of open calls. Blue is open calls. Plenty of negotiated calls for rail. If we look at the same figure, it's 2011, 2016, we'll see that there's fewer open calls for road, more for rail. Rail has increased in number of calls, lesser negotiations for rail, more negotiated contracts for road, plus competitive dialogue that we see. If we look at the few projects we have on PPPs, we'll find that all processes to award PPPs are negotiated, normal since we're talking about more complex situations. Now, looking at the actors' markets, we are using an adjusted concentration ratio. The adjusted concentration ratio, concentration ratio concerns value share of a particular actor in the market. Now, this is very difficult to identify, so the adjusted one we're using concerns number of projects, so not shares in value, but numbers. What we see here is basically that the black line concerns PPP projects. The blue line right at the very end, bottom, is rail in the second period, 2011-2016. We find that approximately 20 actors are involved in the majority of the projects, and then you get more than 2,000, many actors picking up one or two projects at the most. So we can describe this as a two-tier market, meaning there's a part of the market which is oligopolistic in a way, and a part of the market, the majority, where there's strong competition amongst the actors. The rail in the second period shows a flatter trend, which means that the market is far more competitive, and we don't see so much of this two-tier activity. Now, where do these top actors work? They work at home, obviously, the dark blue, and they work all over Europe for roads. The dots are the countries in Europe which had the greater activity in the two periods. In terms of rail, we see something similar. Interesting to note that two countries that in the first period did not have a lot of other activity, top actor activities like France and Italy. In the second period, they become homeland for top actors, which means that there should be quite a bit of cross-country activity, meaning not so many home awards. But when we look at the home awards for road, we see Europe being rather orangey red. Same more or less situation for the second period, 2011-2016. It's not so bad though, because all construction has only 1% cross-border. Here we can even get 3% cross-border. When you look at rail, Poland is very interesting because you see a lot of cross-border there, even though they're top country in activity, number of calls out. When you look at rail, the picture is far more colorful. So more cross-border, more green there, more cross-border. So just looking at these figures, one would think like, and you see at the bottom that all construction is one, but they managed to get almost 20% cross-border, especially in the second period. So one would probably think that rail has managed to get a competitive situation. That's what you would conclude from here. However, if you look at the average number of bids per contract and the single bids awards that follow, the worst situation is for rail in the second period. Fewer bidders per call on average, and over 30% of the calls were awarded to that one bidder. So it seems like it's the least competitive of all. Going back to seeing what we can add to this puzzle, we found that national policies and strategies were the determining factor, but not in terms of this favoritism or protectionism, because we can't pick that up, even if it exists. We found that the share of large projects that are procured in a particular country with respect to Europe in general, the concentration of construction market in the country across sectors, not only road or rail, or basically areas where the same actors are active. Concentration of large actors in the country are important. The market trend in the country is important. And these are items that the National Contracting Authority more or less knows and sets. Project size then becomes sometimes influential, sometimes not. To give you an example, if we have an average market increase, if we've got a large share of projects in the market, if we have a large share of large actors in the market, then an increase in project size leads to more bids. If we change just one parameter, fewer top contractors, then the number of bids falls. And this is exactly what happens in the rail sector of the second period, and that's why we're seeing this figure here. So just some conclusions. We found that PPPs and large infra projects are not much different because they talk about the same actors, the same processes, the same market structure. Top actors are active across sectors and countries. There's greater border activity than for construction in general. Yes. And project size is influential under certain conditions that national authorities can actually set. Obviously, this work has come up with more questions for me than answers. It has added, but there's still so much to ask. Concerning the key question set, we don't identify high competition, so we don't believe that there is the cost of pricing is minimized.